Long before the forests of the western coast were carved into farmland or marked by the boundaries of clans, there was a legend whispering through the oak and the willow. It spoke of a strange horse that emerged from the shadows of twilight every 100 years, an enchanted steed from the underworld that came when the fabric between worlds ran thin. Some said it was as black as night, with eyes that glowed like embers in a dying heart. Others insisted it could change shape, wearing the form of a majestic stallion one moment and a nightmarish phantom the next. Yet all agreed that this horse appeared only at the threshold of the 100-year portal, an event that forced open the gates to hidden realms and defied mortal comprehension. In a remote village near the edge of an ancient grove, the rumor of this mysterious horse had once been told as part of fireside tales. Elders would speak of those who had gone missing on Samhain Eve, months before the legendary century shift, and caution the young not to wander too far from hearth and home. Most in the village paid only minor heed, viewing it as a moral parable or a scare tale meant to keep children from midnight mischief. But over time, the story sank into the bones of the land. Everyone knew that when the heavy autumn fog rolled in and the moon hung just so, it was best to leave well enough alone. The villagers' caution, however, was not unanimous. There was always that occasional wanderer or intrepid soul who wondered if the 100-year portal could be found. The impetus for such a search varied. Some were eager for glory, others for immortality, and a few, in darker moments, longed for a means to escape an existence of sorrow. Whatever the motive, the legend promised that the underworld steed would allow passage only to the bravest or the most foolhardy. For those curious enough to attempt a crossing, the cost remained unclear. No one who had returned, if indeed anyone, had spoke openly of what lay beyond. Morgan, a blacksmith's daughter, was not one to believe in old wives' tales. She had spent much of her youth listening to her father's anvil ring him into an early grave, and she learned the trade herself out of necessity rather than devotion. Her daily life was steeped in iron and soot. She found little time for legends until, one winter, a wandering bard arrived. He carried a golden harp and a cluster of stories about heroes, curses, and twisted bargains. Morgan at first listened to these tales with a skeptic's mind, but the story of the cursed steed glimmered like a fresh sword in her imagination. She couldn't help but be intrigued. The bard spun the yarn late into the night, captivating not just Morgan, but the entire village. He said that in a remote clearing, once every 100 years, a portal appeared, a shimmering arch that led to the underworld, or an otherworldly dimension in Celtic lore. On that very night, the black horse would manifest to guide any traveller bold enough to mount it toward the swirling passage. The catch, he explained, was that the steed and the portal were magnetized to a single purpose, a bridging between mortal and spirit worlds. Yet such bridging would require the traveller to pay a price, often in blood or in spirit. Some soared to unimaginable heights, others vanished forever, and no one could predict which it would be. The realization that the 100-year portal would open that very year unsettled and excited Morgan in equal measure. She had never found a purpose beyond working the forge, hammered by the same routine day after day. But the glimmer of possibility, glory, discovery, or perhaps the unknown, gnawed at the edges of her practicality. She told no one of her fascination except for her closest friend, Aine, who tried to dissuade her. Aine argued there was no point risking life and limb, especially for a legend that might be purely symbolic. But Morgan's determination grew with every rung on the sun's path toward the turning of the year. With the season's shift, Morgan noticed strange occurrences. Lights dancing in the swamp at the edge of the forest. An unearthly moan in the wind after midnight. Even the crows behaved oddly, perching in great flocks near the oak grove, exuding an almost watchful aura, as though they sensed some cosmic shift approaching. She began forging a special sword, one she designed with intricate carvings of knots and Celtic spirals, so delicate she had to hammer at dawn when the metal was most malleable in the cold air. Though she had no illusions that steel alone could save her from a spectral steed, the motion of forging steadied her nerves. hammer on anvil, sparks cascading. Each strike of the metal reminded her that she was, at her heart, someone who made her own path. When Imbolc passed and the snows melted into the streams, rumours drifted in from other towns. Cattle had been found stiff and rigid, drained of colour as though touched by some creeping dread. At the same time, travellers reported glimpses of a black shadow, sometimes on the horizon at dusk, vanishing into mists that left only the echo of a neigh. Some said they heard the ghostly thud of hooves across hills that swallowed sound. Each new story made Morgan feel both fear and anticipation. She prepared quietly, gathering anything that might help her father's hammer, a small pouch of protective herbs from Ain, and a lantern crafted of hammered brass to guide her through the gloom. The nights grew shorter as Beltane approached, but the sense of approaching darkness grew. A hush settled over the forest, and the old villagers began to mutter about an ill omen. Despite warning after warning, Morgan decided she would be the one to find the place and the steed when the 100-year portal opened. Descending the pine-cringed hills at twilight, she told no one. Her departure was a quiet affair, marked only by Ain's tearful plea to return safely. Following the clues from old maps and the bard's story, Morgan journeyed for 7 days, deeper into uninhabited regions. The forest here was ancient, with gnarled birch and twisted yew trees that gave the impression of sentinels guarding an unearthly domain. On the evening of the 7th day, the moon rose nearly full, and the wind held a curious stillness, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Morgan came upon a clearing, circled by standing stones that bore archaic runes, spirals, crosses, and horned shapes, cryptic warnings left by a people long vanished. At the clearing's centre stood a single, massive oak, black bark shining in the moonlight as if slicked with oil. Morgan sensed instantly that this was the place. The air felt thicker, laden with energy. She observed how the shadows stretched unnaturally across the grass, how they flickered in the corner of her vision, refusing to remain in one fixed position. Her heart pounded, and she steadied herself by gripping the hilt of her sword. Then she waited. Hours slipped by in slow, tense intervals, though the moon never seemed to move from its perch overhead. At last, there was no mistaking it. A faint blue glow rose near the largest standing stone, crawling upward like a breath exhaled from the depths of the earth. Out of that glow, a portal began to take form, subtle at first, a pool of light that shimmered like water in starlit darkness. Morgan felt a tug, an unnatural pull drawing her toward it, and she had to brace herself against the stone. Then came the sound, a rumble of hooves at the very edge of hearing, gradually crescendoing, echoing in the hush. With that sound came a rush of wind that spiraled around the clearing. The birds and insects grew silent, as if commanded by an otherworldly presence. Out of the swirling shadows emerged a steed, impossibly black but with eyes that flickered crimson, reflecting the portal's glow. It reared onto its hind legs, hooves pawing at the air, exuding an aura of power that made Morgan's knees go weak. The horse's gaze fell upon her, and she felt a weight in her chest, as though an invisible chain bound her to its presence. She stepped forward, her pulse hammering through her skull. The horse lowered itself, nodding as though inviting her to mount, yet Morgan hesitated, recalling every warning she had ever heard. This was the moment that separated stories from reality. Anyone might talk of bravery, but it was different to stand face to face with something so obviously supernatural, so uncannily powerful. Still, her resolve had carried her this far. She raised her hand, inching it toward the steed's mane. To her surprise, its hair felt like cold silk, sending a shiver through her arm. Summoning her courage, she swung her leg over the horse's flank and settled into place. The instant she was on its back, she sensed the portal's pull intensify. The horse moved forward with a gliding motion, stepping over the threshold of swirling colors. Reality blurred, Morgan felt her stomach lurch and her mouth went dry. Everything shifted in a moment of disorienting kaleidoscope fractals. Then she and the steed were through. They emerged in something that resembled a dim reflection of the clearing. The standing stones remained, but their features were reversed as if mirrored. The oak loomed overhead, larger now, with branches twisting like serpents. The sky above flickered with unfamiliar constellations, and the wind carried whispers in a language she did not recognize. She realized she might be in the Celtic otherworld, a realm often spoken of as a place of both wonder and peril. Here, illusions were as real as the ground beneath one's feet, and bargains struck could last for an eternity. Morgan slid off the horse, her boots crunching on what felt like shards of glass or crystal beneath the grass. The steed seemed to watch her, an intelligence burning in its glowing eyes. She felt a strange kinship, as though it were both guide and captor. Then a voice, a low resonance that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere, echoed across the clearing. It welcomed her, the mortal traveller, to the realm of silent bargains and living memories. Morgan searched for the speaker, only to see that it was the horse itself. Its mouth did not move, but the voice she heard in her mind was unmistakably male, ancient, and burdened with sorrow. "You have come to cross. You bear steel made by your own hand, tempered by the fire of your will," the voice said. "Yet you know not the price. Should you wish to pass beyond, or to return whence you came, you must prove your mettle." Morgan swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. She could scarcely believe the horse was speaking to her telepathically, yet the moment felt profoundly real. She asked, "What must I do?" At once the clearing quivered, and from behind the stones emerged figures dressed in ceremonial garb, each cloaked in black, faces obscured. They carried torches that flickered with blue flame. The voice of the steed spoke again in her mind. "Challenge them and their illusions. Survive and you may pass." Morgan felt the steel at her hip and drew the sword she had forged. Its blade gleamed with an otherworldly shimmer under the torchbearer's uncanny light. She was no stranger to the weight of a blade, but the adrenaline that coursed through her now was unlike any she had felt while practicing on straw dummies. The torch-bearers advanced in a slow circle, chanting. Their words pricked at the edges of understanding, half Gallic, half something older than time. One lunged with a staff that flickered with unearthly fire. Morgan parried, the clash of sword against staff sending sparks rippling across the ring. She pressed forward, mindful that illusions could mask deadly realities. Her sword cut through the torch-bearer's robe, revealing a swirl of darkness within, as though the figure was made of living shadow. When the robe fell to the ground, nothing remained but the flame of the staff, floating for a moment before vanishing. The others raised their torches high, and from the ground rose a shimmering shape that resolved into a pale woman in a flowing gown, eyes the color of frost. The aura surrounding her was suffused with regret and longing. "Lay down your blade," the apparition commanded softly. "You fight illusions, yet you do not see what you truly seek. Life, love, or redemption?" Morgan's grip tightened. She remembered the stories about the otherworld's power to mesmerize travelers, to trap them in illusions of desire or regret. With breath unsteady, she spoke. "I seek my own path. I see fear, but I also see possibility." In that moment she recognized the figure as a wraith, a manifestation woven from her own doubts and uncertainties. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, recalling her reasons for taking this journey, the desire to break free from the confines of a life that felt too narrow. Then, summoning all her resolution, she advanced. The wraith's mournful expression flickered before it lunged, arms reaching out like tendrils of mist. Morgan slashed once, and the apparition dissolved into motes of light. The remaining robed figures hissed in unison, their torches extinguishing one by one, until the clearing was pitched in near-total darkness, illuminated only by the faint glow of the starless sky. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the chanting and illusions ceased. In their place stood the black Steed, watching her with an inscrutable gaze. "You have chosen to resist the illusions," the mental voice intoned. "But the final choice is yet to come." The Steed moved aside, and Morgan saw a second portal across the clearing, a ghostly archway crackling with energy. On one side, she saw a vision of her village, her father's forge, Ain's worried face. On the other side, a strange landscape beckoned, a land of undying lights, rolling hills studded with crystals, and whispering streams. She realized the portals offered a stark choice: return home to the life she knew, or journey deeper into this realm to seek greater truths, though perhaps never to return. She glanced at the horse, and its eyes flared. "One step either way, and your fate is sealed," came the voice. Then came another presence, a figure clad in tattered finery, with a circlet of bronze on his brow. His face was pale as the moon, and a single scar traced the line of his jaw. "Name your desire," he said, and crossed the threshold. "If you choose to remain in the other world, you shall learn secrets beyond mortal comprehension. If you turn back, then your mortal life is what you must embrace, with all it entails. The forging of iron, the joys and burdens of your world." Morgan felt her heartbeat resound. She glanced from the vision of her village to the luminous expanse of the other world. She thought of her father, the forge, the daily grind that had once felt suffocating. Yet she also considered the intangible blessings of home familiar arms, ready to offer comfort, the smell of freshly baked bread, laughter shared on cold winter nights. On the other side lay the promise of adventure and knowledge. She was tempted, deeply tempted. In the hush that followed, she recalled Ain's words, urging caution. She recalled the paradox of the stories those who took the ride either found ruin or unimaginable wealth of spirit. Could she be sure which fate was hers? The horse stamped a hoof, and a ripple of energy coursed through the ground. The clouds in the sky seemed to swirl, as though reflecting her inner turmoil. For a moment, she remembered the first time she swung a hammer, and how the spark of metal meeting metal had made her feel powerful, capable of shaping her own destiny. Home might not be a cage if she chose to see it differently. Life and adventure didn't have to be found only in distant realms. Sometimes, the forging of one's day-to-day existence required as much courage as stepping into an unknown dimension. With resolve tightening her chest, Morgan turned away from the shimmering unknown. She approached the portal that showed her home, sheathed her sword, and placed one hand upon the intangible barrier. She felt the quiet acceptance of her own choice, the knowledge that growth could occur wherever one planted one's roots. The horse neighed softly, and she sensed in it a curious blend of sorrow and approval. A final whisper echoed in her mind, "Your choice is honored. Go, shape your life as the blacksmith of your own destiny." She stepped through, her vision filling with a cascade of light and spinning color. When the world settled, she was back in the ancient grove, the standing stones silent and still. Dawn light glinted through the treetops, painting the grassy clearing in golden rays. The portal was gone. The black Steed was nowhere to be seen. Only the hush of early morning birdsong greeted her ears. She sank to her knees, taking a moment to ground herself. Exhaling the breath she had been holding, she stood and touched the hilt of her sword. It felt real, warm from her grip. A swirl of leftover magic seemed to spark from its edge, a reminder that the events of the night were no dream. Weary and relieved, Morgan made her way back through the forest trails, guided by the first light of sunrise. Along the path, she encountered traces of footprints that disappeared into the dew, a reminder that she was not the first to seek the 100-year portal, nor would she be the last. But she was alive, and she'd chosen to return. Despite the fatigue in her limbs, her step felt surer than it ever had before. The forest parted for her like a gentle host, and she at last emerged into the familiar fields outside her village. When she arrived at her doorstep, Aine was there, fatigue lining her eyes from sleepless worry. Aine's face lit up with a mixture of relief and exasperation. She rushed to Morgan, enveloping her in a tight embrace, asking a flurry of questions she wanted answered. Morgan merely smiled. There would be time to explain the unexplainable, piece by piece. For now, she was profoundly grateful to be home. In the weeks that followed, life settled back into its rhythms, yet everything felt subtly changed. Morgan returned to the forge, working the bellows and hammering iron into shape. But the tasks she once found tedious now held purpose. She began creating new designs, weaving Celtic knots into the metal, each piece telling a fragment of the story she could never quite put into words. People noticed that something about her had shifted. Her gaze was more distant, as if she had peered beyond the veil and returned with a quiet resolve. She also found solace in the knowledge that her life's meaning might not lie solely in crossing into far-flung realms. Perhaps the real battle was to exist fully in the one realm she inhabited, shaping and forging her destiny without running from the familiarity that once stifled her. She decided to share just enough of her experiences to warn others. The cursed steed was real, and the 100-year portal was not a place for idle folly. She told no one the deeper secrets of how to call the steed or the precise nature of the challenges faced. It was a delicate truth, something she guarded, for she believed each traveller must walk their own path, make their own choice. It was a secret she kept mostly to herself, with faint hints whispered to the wise or the desperate who sought her out in hushed tones. Seasons passed. Morgan stepped into autumn with a renewed spirit. Harvest after harvest she grew older. Yet she did not forget her night in the other world. Every full moon she would gaze out from the forge's window, half expecting to hear hooves in the distance. Shadows could play tricks, but she swore that sometimes she saw a flicker of crimson eyes in the tree line, or felt a gentle breeze stir the edges of her cloak when there was no wind. Then she would look to her sword resting in a place of honour by the hearth, and think of that moment when she chose to return, to live among her people rather than chase after illusions. On the centennial approach, whispers would inevitably resurface. Wandering minstrels would speak of the 100-year portal, some in exaggerated tones, others with solemn warning. Children, as children do, sought the thrill of the unknown. Morgan would quietly caution them. She had also found new joy in teaching aspiring smiths, those who showed interest in the craft. She taught them that forging something real, tangible and strong can be its own profound adventure, requiring just as much courage and endurance as any journey into myth. Occasionally, someone would be so enthralled by the legend that they would press Morgan for details, persistent in their quest to uncover the location of the fabled portal. She would speak of the risk and the ephemeral nature of the crossing. Most left with curiosity dampened but not extinguished. Some, fired by ambition or desperation, left determined to seek the black steed themselves. Morgan knew that any who truly sought it and truly believed might find what they were looking for, or what they feared. Eventually, talk of the underworld horse and its swirling gateway turned to distant rumour again, buried beneath the day-to-day clamour of life in the countryside. The land cycled through sowing and harvest, births and funerals, laughter and tears. Morgan grew old, but her heart remained alert to the subtle energies that once carried her on the midnight ride. Now and then she'd catch someone gazing at her sword with wide eyes, noticing that its blade seemed untouched by time, still shining as though freshly forged. When asked about it, she would merely smile and remind them that some stories are best learned, not told. Though she never again mounted the steed nor crossed through that portal, she carried its memory in her mind. It remained a compass, guiding her decisions no matter how mundane they seemed on the surface. She had been granted a glimpse of endless possibility, and she chose the mortal life. finding depth in commitment to the day-to-day. In that sense, she had earned a different kind of heroism, not in the realm of legends, but in the forging of a life well lived, fully embraced. In hushed twilight moments, while embers glowed in the hearth and smoke curled to the rafters, Morgan would reflect on the fleeting nights of dancing lights and echoes of phantom hooves. She found comfort in knowing she did once cross the boundary and return. She also felt a passing ache, wondering if, somewhere in the eternal night, a black steed still roamed, eyes glowing like embers, awaiting the next soul brave or foolhardy enough to try their luck. The years went on, and Morgan's story blended into the tapestry of local lore. Over time, new generations heard only fragments of it, an echo among other Celtic tales of shape-shifting horses, trickster fae, and hidden doorways in old oaks. But occasionally, on the darkest nights, when the mist clung to the ground and the wind carried low whispers, someone swore they heard a distant neigh, and in that fleeting moment, whether winnowed by hearthlight or starlight, they felt the boundary between the known and unknown tremble underfoot, reminding all who heard it that once every 100 years, an ancient power stirred, and a choice awaited those who dared to rise.